Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this session, Increasing Innovation and Collaboration with Municipal P3 Environmental Infrastructure Projects. I'm Sonya Watson, CAO of the Municipality of Brockton, and happy to be moderating this session today. As the country embarks on historic investments in infrastructure to tackle climate change and transition Canada to a circular economy, the use of public-private partnerships, P3s, are becoming increasingly problematic. While P3s have been successful with social capital projects, its application to large-scale municipal environmental infrastructure projects has been attributed to increased project costs and financial risks, schedule delays, and contractual disputes. Project developers and municipalities across Canada have been actively engaged in pursuing alternative contracting models that increase collaboration, flexibility, and transparency to address the aforementioned issues in the procurement process. Today's panel will discuss some of those pinch points with the current P3 models and provide insights on alternative project delivery scenarios. So today, I welcome three speakers who will address these issues and provide alternative solutions. First up, we have Mark Sanderson, the VP of Major Project Development with Veolia North America. Rhonda Harris, Owner's Advisor with Brown Caldwell, and Faithe Holder, Partner with Gowling's. So for this session, I will start off our discussion by asking Mark Sanderson, what do you see are the challenges of current project delivery options, Mark?
Thanks, Sonia. Before providing my comments, I'd like to recognize the leadership of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships for including this important topic for discussion at this year's conference, and thank all of you for participating today. As municipal environmental infrastructure projects have become larger and more complex, the demands and expectations of these projects have become more challenging, in particular with respect to project delivery options through public-private partnerships, or P3s. It is important to point out that P3s have been successful with social capital projects such as hospitals, long-term care, and transportation infrastructure. However, its application to large-scale municipal environmental infrastructure such as water, wastewater, and waste processing has in some cases led to untenable financial risks and costs resulting in no bids, project delays, and even in some cases the project being shelved. To put this in context, municipal environmental infrastructure projects typically involve municipal planning and scoping a project and a feasibility study and developing a business case and risk assessment. While market soundings, the issuance of expressions of interest, and other collaborative methods are often part of the project scoping exercise, there is usually limited engagement by the design builder and the operator in the overall process once the request for proposal has been issued. The actual process is often under a time constraint that limits the ability of the competitive teams to complete appropriate levels of due diligence or causes them to have to take considerable risk to be selected. Commonly referred to as competitive hard bid contracting, some of the procurement models used are design bid build, design build finance, and design build finance operate and maintain, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with. Each of these models are price-centric competitive procurement processes based on owner's terms of condition, which actually leads to a competitive who is willing to take the most risk element. Depending on the specific project, the owner and his priorities, there are three areas of concern associated with these large-scale projects that I'm just going to cover briefly. They are risk transference, limited indicative design, and lack of innovation. With respect to risk transference, municipal projects typically transfer the design build operations and maintenance risk to a consortium or bid team. Risks need to be allocated to the party which is best able to mitigate it. For this reason, the Design Build Commission, operate and maintain organizations involved in the initial project scoping and estimating will maximize understanding of risks, triggers, probability, and consequences, such that the appropriate costs and risk mitigation approaches can be determined, thereby reducing the contingency that has to be allocated. It is important to note that your project design build services are for a shorter term, typically 3 to 4 years, and are generally focused on providing the upfront design, technology supply, construction, and facility commissioning. This is distinct and mutually exclusive from the longer-term operation and maintenance services for a longer term, which is often beyond 20 years. A significant issue is the overlap of risk between the entities responsible for different scope elements. Addressing limited indicative design, a focus on the lowest cost or fixed bid is difficult based on a limited indicative project design. This is particularly challenging for large-scale multi-year projects where price is committed far too early in the procurement process. Obviously, time-limited procurement process limits the inability to innovate as well. Locking in contract values in the process may drive the vendor to add large continues to cover their risks, or drives bad behaviors that vendors find the lowest cost ways of working through issues which put at risk quality, schedule, or put risk into downstream phases. The lowest cost or fixed bid can also be a disincentive to encourage innovative technologies. And also, projects have become larger and more complex. The cost of preparing tenders has become exorbitant, further encouraging no bids. Just addressing innovation a little bit further, given the increased complexity of infrastructure projects, coupled with the rigidity of the procurement processes and a low-cost fixed bid environment, project developers are less inclined to bring forth alternative or innovative solutions for fear of losing bids or giving away a competitive advantage under a time-constrained procurement. So in summary, in closing, the cumulative effect of these challenges, what we've seen increased transfer of project and financial risks onto the design builder and operation providers, which has led to an increase in project costs and some projects being delayed, canceled, or no bid. And an alternative to these approaches is collaborative contracting, which we are seeing a groundswell of interest and support by groups within the project development and municipal advisory sectors. Because of the characteristics, they have that deal with the very things we have discussed. The rest of our discussion will be to focus on these.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Rhonda, we'll start with you. Do you have any further comments on Mark's information?
Well, I just want to maybe emphasize and reiterate the risk issue is, in my opinion, the biggest issue, and how the allocation of risk is done based on the individual project delivery method. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I speak, but I see that as the biggest issue. Faithe?
Thanks, Rhonda.
Sure, and I mean, I think the only thing I will add is sort of a high-level comment. In the space that I currently work in, which is more the social infrastructure space, I've had the chance to see a number of projects go into operations, and you learn a lot of lessons from that approach. And one of the lessons is that it can actually be challenging, and this is general and high level, but it can be challenging to navigate sort of the interfacing, the risk allocation concerns, disputes, et cetera, that arise between the parties in a traditional model. And so a collaborative model, which I know we're going to talk quite a bit about over the course of the next while, would be a good way to unpack some of these challenges that arise between the parties. It's more of a carrots rather than a sticks approach to project delivery, and I think it makes sense to explore it with respect to the challenges in operations.
Thanks, Faithe. That's a good lead in to move to Rhonda. So Rhonda, why collaborative contracting, and what are some of the options in terms of the types of project delivery?
Well, thanks, Sonya. That's a really good question, and this is a good lead in. Collaborative delivery covers a spectrum of options for your project deliveries, and this is everything from the traditional design bid build to construction management at risk called CMAR, to progressive design build, through fixed price design build, through a design build operate that Mark mentioned, but with multiple ways to do your O&M model on that, all the way through a public-private partnership, with advantages and disadvantages of each of these methods. The critical components to consider when you're making the decisions for each of the specific collaborative delivery methods would include understanding the statutory and regulatory requirements in your area and your particular purview, what market precedents are available to you in your area, and the technical and the permitting requirements. The CMAR and DB approaches look at your team qualifications, they look at your project approach, and in some cases they'll look at pricing for both pre-construction and phase one services. Oh, that's not me. So owners often use both a best value approach and a life cycle cost approach in making decisions on the form of collaborative delivery method that you are selecting. You do have some primary drivers that you want to look at to evaluate the different options, and these vary with each owner organization. Then you have to weight these considerations, including number one, the controlling and allocation of your risk. Also defining the cost and its importance, because in some cases cost is less important than risk or schedule. Sometimes it's more. So you have to define that cost and it's important in the hierarchy. Identifying the importance of your schedules, really recognizing whether or not you want to or want to be able to use innovation in your project, identifying and addressing your key stakeholders, and really looking at and assessing the operational impacts once the project is finished and your project is in service. So an organization has to define their operational project objectives. They have to, how they're going to align to a specific delivery model, how they're going to optimize that risk allocation, and establish methods and metrics for that project success. They can look at which collaborative delivery method would work best for them for that specific project. So you want to look at a range of selection criteria and be sure that you specify that as an owner in your, along with your authorized budget in your procurement documents. And these include your key personnel, because that's really, really important in documenting who is going to be working on this project and who's going to be leading it. And the firm's experience with similar projects, your particular proposed approach to project delivery, whether you want to include innovative design suggestions and construction ideas so that you can meet your objectives, a definitive timeline schedule for the design and the construction of a project, and a really strong commissioning plan. As well as a key point is willingness to work as a team with the owner staff. So there are some funding considerations to collaborative delivery methods, and that really includes defining and obtaining your funding and your financing options. Those may come from a variety of different places. You need to understand the market capacity and the risk tolerance, and that risk tolerance in the last 2 years has changed dramatically in the P3 and the collaborative delivery area. You also want to understand how to apply your cash flow constraints to your project. So the organization, the owner's organization, may accomplish this with internal resources, or they may decide to use an owner advisor to assist them in the level of project detail that is required for a successful procurement process. The level of project specification, including technical definition, level of design, performance requirements, all the way through to your contract documents, really depends on the delivery method that you have selected. So given that broad spectrum of topics to be addressed, the owner may or may not have the internal resources and the procurement and technical expertise to evaluate and justify the use of a collaborative method. So using an owner advisor to augment these resources is an optional consideration, and it's widely practiced in the collaborative delivery area for helping you implement your projects from planning through implementation. So as you see, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of questions, a lot of decisions you have to make, and a lot of thought process in putting together a collaborative delivery method and picking the best one for your project. Sonya?
Thank you, Rhonda. That's a lot of great information on a complex topic. Faithe. Yes. Faithe, do you have any comments or additions to that?
Well, funny enough, I don't really, because it's interesting. We have not actually had a chance to hear each other's remarks. And as I'm listening to Rhonda, I'm thinking that is absolutely thorough, and she's covered all the things I would have covered. I think the only thing I would really say is, you know, at the end of the day, when you're engaging in this process and you're engaging in it from the collaborative perspective, the idea is to start off thinking that we're going into a win-win rather than thinking adversarially. And that might sound really basic, and it may actually sound quite obvious, but I think the approach that you take going in, which is then the approach that your advisors, et cetera, take going in, will make a difference in terms of the outcome.
Absolutely agreed.
Thanks for that, Faithe. And Mark, any additions to Rhonda's presentation?
Yes, a couple things. First, I recognize that this morning Mark Bain talked about renovate, not reconstruct. And I think that's a really important element of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to build on best practices. And further, that was emphasized by Howard Ashcroft in the keynote speaker, where he talked about relationship contracting. And I think that's really important element. We're trying to move the procurement and maybe the relationship further along before we lock everything in. And then finally, I think it's really important that we draw a distinction between the different risk profiles that a design builder has versus what an operator has. And we get rid of the overlap. And we can do that through this collaborative process.
Exactly.
Great points, Mark. Okay, we're doing good for time here. Faithe, we will be moving on to you.
Question. I think she froze up.
I think Sonya is frozen, but I think essentially where she was headed was to have me take a look at how municipalities can integrate collaborative contracting in their procurement processes and what resources and skills are needed. And so, you know, it's interesting being in the position of speaking after Mark and Rhonda, because I am in a position where I think I'm going to reiterate some of what they've said, and reiterated probably on a high level, sort of a summary basis. You know, and the last comment that Mark just made in relation to kind of engaging is an important one for a springboard in terms of the comments I will make. I think, you know, the dialogue needs to be continued. It's been started and it's been progressed by many people in relation to the collaborative model. When we look at P3s globally, this model, looking at things collaboratively, whether we call it the alliance model or give it any other name, it's not new. It's not a novel concept. It's been used in other parts of the world. You know, I can say certainly the UK, some states in the United States, etc. So the conversations have started to occur, and they are now occurring more locally amongst provinces, municipalities, etc. There are lessons learned that exist, and as a result of these past experiences, it can actually be instructive for municipalities looking to enter into this realm as to what may or may not have worked. It's important to tap into the experiences of others to find out, you know, exactly that, what may work, what may not work in the context of specific projects that the municipality is contemplating, and how others may have managed successfully to engage in integration of the model in the past. I think in his opening remarks, Mark mentioned market sounding, and I'd like to reiterate that as well. When we're looking at lessons learned and experiences of others, you know, engaging in some kind of market testing or market sounding process is absolutely key. In order for any project in the P3 space to succeed, you know, actively engage private sector participants is a key ingredient. And so this is just as important in the context of the collaborative model as it would be in one of the traditional models that we'd be engaging in. And so going into the process, it's important to know what risks, obligations, likely market participants are willing to bear and how that may align with the municipality's needs. You know, it's not often the case that you are finding one sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to this. So it is important to ensure that you become as knowledgeable as a municipal entity, you become as knowledgeable as possible about the model, its pros and cons, and each project that's being contemplated needs to be determined on its own basis based on the information that you've gathered about the model and the options available to you. I think the other component, apart from taking the experiences of others into consideration, the other component to think about is something that Rhonda touched on when she spoke of resources. She spoke of, you know, perhaps using advisors, etc. I think that to engage in the collaborative model, it's absolutely key to have dedicated resources. And I know this may appear a little counterintuitive when resources are often quite limited at the municipal level. But when you're making the choice in terms of allocation of your resources, this may be one area to allocate those resources, because it could mean the difference between success and not so much success in relation to your project delivery. If you're taking existing staff and allocating a portion of their time to the project, I think that would likely fall short of the commitment that's required to make this approach work. The resource commitment cannot be part-time, in my view, or a side component of someone's otherwise busy schedule. A dedicated team truly is required to maintain the level of collaboration or interaction, investment or engagement that's needed throughout the entire process. And lastly, again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to speak about another component that was already touched on by Rhonda, and that is engaging forward-thinking advisors. And there is a way, I guess, that could seem a little self-serving, given that I'm in an advisory role, but it's not meant in that way at all. It is truly, from my perspective, a key component of the process. And advisors run the gamut. You're looking at engineering, financial, technical, legal, etc. And so while this model, as I said earlier, may not be new globally, it is not an approach that has significant precedent in the Canadian marketplace. And so engaging consultants who can process and think outside of the traditional P3 box would be helpful in implementing and papering any project that you choose to deliver using this model. In theory, my view is the approach is meant to foster, as I said earlier, a win-win mentality amongst participants. And one of the ways to get there is to ensure that you have advisors leading the charge with the same mentality. And all I will say in summary is, input from such advisors can be particularly useful and perhaps even persuasive when there's a need to obtain various levels of approvals from perhaps council and others. So it's an important component, I think, to take into consideration. Those are sort of the high-level comments I had, Sonya. Thanks.
Thanks, Faith. Good points on the need, on the limited resources in municipalities and the need to, have this advisory expertise to tackle some of these large infrastructure projects. So I'll move on to Rhonda. Any further additions to Faith's comments?
No, those were great. I really believe that, we are preaching it from the same choir, maybe, because we believe strongly that, while we all are advisors, we also are here to help you make the best project you can and to get what you need. And I come from the operations maintenance side, so I'm really looking at the end product and the end result and want the client to have everything that they need to make sure that their operators, if they're going to run it themselves, can run it and maintain it at the end of the process, or if they have to have some additional help, that they engage the appropriate contractual operational organization to help them do that, depending on what the project is about. So I really try to be agnostic. To me, the biggest important part of this is you spend all this money on a delivery of a project, and it needs to work when you get it. So all of this whole concept is really to try to get you to a finished project that works for you the best we can. And that's that's the whole point of this. In my opinion, all three of us have talked about this previously. It's the point of this whole concept of partnerships and public-private partnerships and design, build, and collaborative delivery, and all the different terms you see in alternative delivery, collaborative delivery, is to get you to the end game where it works for you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Mark, anything to add or?
Yes, thank you. A couple of things. We're talking about municipal environmental infrastructure, and I think from our perspective, and I really reinforce Faith's comment about having advisors, because this is very complex. Not everybody's an engineer, and and getting into the room and talking about the kind of things that we want to innovate or pilot. We need somebody on the other side of the table that really understands not just our engineering and technical aspects, but the legal and framework. And what's unique also about municipal environmental infrastructure is just the myriad of stakeholders. And the advisors can be a great intermediary between us and the stakeholders, whether they're elected officials, non-technical people, whatever. And the collaborative approach really lends itself to that. And what you need at the end of the day is informed people to make the decisions and be able to actually close the transaction. And that's becoming educated, informed, which the advisors help, the collaborative approach help, and having some time to do that. That's not so constrained by a procurement where it's just done in a number of weeks or months.
Correct.
That's great, Mark. I do have a few questions here, so we'll maybe go through those, and we have a bit of time left here. So the first question, the opening comments suggest that P3s for municipal water projects can deliver poor outcomes. So what's the alternative if the municipality needs funding? Do I have anybody that's ready to tackle that one?
Can deliver poor projects, poor outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how they got that, but
yeah,
in my opinion, this is an opportunity. Every method, any method can fail, any method, if it's not embraced and done correctly. And that includes a design bid build. You're straight up, but every method can fail. Every method can succeed. So the goal is to make it collaborative so that it does succeed, whichever method you pick. Guys?
Yeah.
Sorry, Faith, go ahead. You go.
No, the only thing I was going to add, because I think if I heard the question correctly, it said, what is the alternative? And I was just going to say the alternatives are all of those project delivery models that Mark mentioned as he was doing his intro remarks. So to Rhonda's point, every method can fail, but there are a myriad of methods. And it's when you look at your project and you're looking at what your needs are, it's determining which of the models, whether it's an existing one where we have a lot of experience or one that's more novel, which of the models works for you in terms of the project that you are looking to put into the marketplace and the process that you're engaging in. So there are options and alternatives within the various models that exist.
Thanks, Faith. Mark, did you have further comments?
Yeah, I raised my hand. Some of my comments may have suggested that, and kind of framing the challenges that we face, that risk transference that's excessive, that companies have accepted has caused bad results in terms of their financial or even ability to perform. And the very concept of it, of encouraging further collaboration, is to recognize those challenges. These challenges also cause municipalities or stakeholders with whatever form, whether they're participants, to not participate because they recognize that there's a lot of things that are undecided, a lot of uncertainty, and to do it quickly causes a lot of anxiety, it's safe to say. So what we're trying to do is say, you've got a project, it's very complex. Not everything has been determined and understood. So take a little longer, work together. And I really liked what, I'm sorry, I'm looking for my notes, the relationship contracting that Howard talked about. This is what this is about. And in the meantime, you're building relationships, you're taking away uncertainty. And that comes to a better result.
Thanks, Mark. And we do have another good question here. Can you speak to a set of screening criteria that a municipality should consider before deciding on a delivery model? Anybody want to take a stab at that first?
Well, I would suggest, if this is an environmental project, again, water, wastewater, stormwater, environmental side of your municipal agency, take a look at the Water Design Build Council criteria, because they are a non-for-profit, have all aspects of participants, and they've built a design book that is, in fact, goes through in detail each of the methodologies and each of the criteria that you need to look at. Now, the book is, 100 pages, so I can't sit here and rattle it all off to you in 10 minutes, but it's great information. I touched on the very basics of that in my talk, just the main criteria, really looking at the drivers, the financial and the technical criteria. But it's in detail in this manual that they put out, a design build manual, which I have my copy sitting over here, is really a useful reference book. The Design Build Institute of America also has a good reference documentation. Both of these organizations do great specific training on these concepts, like Design Build 101, where they go through all of these details and really talk about all the different aspects of it. So they're both nonprofits, so I'm not feeling like I'm giving a plug to some company, but they both have a lot of really good information. They are educational, nonprofit educational organizations. And I think that would be a place to start for really getting into the detail of a specific criteria that you want to look at. Again, keep in mind those drivers that I talked about, though, because those drivers are really, really important. And they're sharing, controlling your risk, defining your cost, looking at the importance of your schedules, whether or not you want innovation, looking at your key stakeholders, and then assessing your operational impacts. So those drivers need to inform the criteria that you want to pick for your particular project.
Excellent points, Rhonda. Really good. Anything else to add?
The only other point I wanted to make, and I'm hesitating a little simply because I don't know factually whether this is the case, but to the point I was making earlier about there being lessons learned and learning from the experiences of others, et cetera, I just wonder whether some of the provincial agencies that run these projects will have information that they could potentially share with municipal organizations that are looking to engage in this process about the criteria, the screening criteria. It may not be specific to the collaborative model per se, but to engage in sort of some general thoughts and ideas and views based on screening processes that they themselves, the provincial organizations, have engaged in over the years, and to adapt that to your own process may in fact be helpful. So hopefully something like that does exist, and I'm not leading you down the wrong path, but I suspect that that would be a place to get some assistance.
Thanks, Faith. Anything else, Mark? Or
yes, thank you. I would say that the more complex, the more innovative that you're looking for, the more uncertainty that drives you more to the collaboration end of the continuum. That was a driver for alliance partnerships at the very beginning when they first came, was just didn't know anything and had to figure it out. And then they did it together. So the more you can come back on that continuum of risk understanding, don't need innovation, and the less collaboration, although we obviously are positioning that collaboration is a really, really good thing. There's no zero collaboration at the end of that continuum.
For sure. Okay, and I have another question here, probably be almost the last one. So selection of an appropriate technical and process solution is an important milestone on any water, wastewater treatment project. I found that a design build approach can lead to the greatest number of options and innovation for the owner, not constraining them to a single technical and process solution. Do you agree with this? And are there circumstances where design build does not result in inherent innovation or collaboration?
Yes and yes. Yes, I agree that it can, but yes, it has happened where it didn't. So I think that's the whole point of this, is the co-collaboration is trying to make the process work better, but occasionally it doesn't. And, without naming names, we could sit here and give you a couple of examples. Any one of us could give you a couple of examples where it didn't work, but the whole point is to see what you can do to make it work and not dwell on. You have to understand what the risks are and understand where potholes in the hills are to, you know, the blocks in there, because there will be blocks. But really understand how to work around those blockades, how to, you know, you go over it, under it, or knock it down, right? So how do you figure out how to do that and try to keep that from happening and make sure that your project's successful? And any one of these collaborative delivery methods will have blockades, and they will have ways to work around them.
Great. Any further comments to that, Faith or Mark?
Well, I could give you an example that the time constraint of a design build would not allow piloting that we would be looking to do through 4 seasons or for a year longer. And sometimes it's even longer than that, because you take the pilot and then you don't like the results, so you pilot something else. And so definitely a collaborative approach would allow for that type of complexity of evaluation and due diligence that you just can't do in a design build time period procurement typically.
Great. Anything to add, Faith? I do have another question here that's came in.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So did municipal contracts attract investors for a better ROI and collaborative model? Did municipal contracts attract investors for a better ROI and collaborative model?
Well, from my opinion, municipal contracts don't have investors in the typical definition of investor as compared to a private sector contract. You do have investors in the sense that you have stakeholders, and you even have investors in the sense that you may have federal grant money or provincial funding or those kinds of investments. And yes, you need to, again, ROI typically is applied to a private sector, not to a public sector, but there is a return on your investment. And so you do need to determine what that is and make sure that you're getting what you're paying for, whether it's a public type investment or a private type of investment. So it's a little bit of an odd question for a municipal enterprise, but not particularly, because we do have grants, we have loans, we have funding from various agencies that are looking back to determine whether or not those were valid and productive grants, loans, and funding. So they're going to look to the ROI of that particular project. Faith, you've dealt more with this on the social side.
Yeah, and I think some of my facial expressions may have expressed, I was similarly, I think, hearing the question the way you were, Rhonda, and thinking that some of the terminology, the ROI, the investment language didn't necessarily apply to my understanding in the same way of the municipal projects and the offerings there. But what I will say, because I agree with the comments you made, and what I will say is, if we're looking at this as an investment process, right, where we are looking for some form of return and measurement of that return on the investment from a municipal level, it really does underscore the upfront work, the preparation, things like the market sounding, things like having the advisors on board, because that sets you up for the best return on investment at the end of the process. So I'm not, I admit, I'm not 100% certain how to apply the concepts in terms of the way the question was worded. But if we're going to look generally to what your return on investment would be for entering into this process, it would be setting yourself up appropriately in advance, having a good understanding, very good understanding of the process you're engaging in, the model you're planning to use, and having the systems in place to support that so that your project is successful at the end. Hopefully that's of some assistance.
For sure, Faith. Anything else, Mark?
Yeah, I would just add from a risk perspective, which investors are really, really good at understanding and managing. We can encourage them to take a lower return on investment if the risk is mitigated and understood. The collaborative process encourages that, which decreases the cost.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
Good point. Yeah.
Well, it looks to be that's the last question of our on here. So I just want to thank all of our presenters, Mark, Rhonda, and Faith. And lot of great information here today. As a smaller municipality, some of these large infrastructure projects are a big undertaking, and as we continue to look for efficiencies and stretch the dollar, it's a new way of thinking that I think a lot of municipalities have to turn their minds towards. So thank you for your time today, and I think had an excellent session.
Thank you.
Thank you.